American soldiers from the Revolutionary War who were fighting before they even had the right to vote. So there's a lot of complex layers just to the veteran population that you have to consider, just in addition to the fact that they're a veteran. Um, I think that's just important to state up front. Um, I don't have any PowerPoints today because I just didn't have the heart to do that to you guys. I've sat through too many hour-long PowerPoint conversations, and to be honest, it's painful, and so I didn't want to do that to you guys. So it's going to be a little bit more of a freewheeling conversation, I suppose. But please stop and ask me questions, or if you have, you're concerned about something you want me to clarify, just absolutely do that. Okay, so I guess I want to just start a little bit with um, understanding some bias towards veterans. And I'm going to start with a story of a person named Smedley Butler. He was a Marine Corps general, twice awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, and retired after World War One. And Smedley Butler led a big protest of thousands of veterans um, in Washington D.C. who were demanding that they get their World War One bonus payments. And essentially, they went to Washington and said, "Hey, you guys promised this. You didn't deliver. We went and fought. Now it's time to hold up your end of the bargain." Um, and as you guys may remember, that was right during FDR, the Great Depression, all that stuff, and the rise of fascism in Europe. And some folks approached Smedley Butler after he had done this protest in Washington, and essentially asked him to be the leader of a new military organization to overthrow the United States government. It's called the Business Plot. You can go look it up. There's a movie called Amsterdam that sort of fictionalizes it. But anyways, these folks came to him and basically said, "Look, you have all this military experience, and we can tell that you don't like the government. So we want you to lead the fascist overthrow of the United States government." And he looked at these guys like they were crazy because that was absolutely not who he was. And um, it's just one example of folks looking at uh, people in the military and maybe getting the wrong impression of them. So, one thing I guess that we're dealing with, at least from the veteran perspective, is what people call the military civilian divide. And um, I guess the best way and the most simple way to understand that, at least from my perspective, is um, as a veteran uh, who served, especially in combat, um, that's a very specific and unique experience that it's hard to quantify or really put into short amount of words to explain to folks. Um, and and especially with the fact that in the global war on terror, which is it still going? I don't know. It seems like it, but so few Americans have volunteered for such a long war, and so then you get a specific group of folks who have done something for so long, um, where they just feel like the rest of the population of the United States really doesn't understand them or what they're going through. And this isn't like World War II or Korea or Vietnam, where you have people getting drafted or you got to buy war bonds and people are sacrificing at home for this thing. This was 20-year long war where people just continued on their life. Um, and then veterans come home and uh, they just feel out of step with everyone, to some extent. And I think a good example of this is this idea of thank you for your service. Um, and it's it's good in the sense that it looks in a way it looks like we're making progress as a society, because you look at the Vietnam veterans who came back, they're spit on, they're called baby killers, um, and these guys were and women were people who that didn't necessarily volunteer to go to war. And now it's almost it's gone the other way, right? So now you have folks who will come up and say thank you for your service, and as a veteran, I'm thinking I'm internalizing it as, well, what are you thanking me for? You know, um, and it's kind of a difficult thing to say because you feel awkward, um, because sometimes it feels like they're being genuine, and that's great, but a lot of times it feels like a platitude. Like you have the NFL, they can sell camouflage sweatshirts, and that does nothing for me. That doesn't make me feel any better. That doesn't really thank me for my service. But I think a lot of folks also don't know how to interact with a veteran without feeling like, well, I don't want to upset them, or maybe there's some preconceived notions. And so I think what today, what I'd like to do is sort of deconstruct that a little bit, and um, give folks some ways to communicate with veterans. And it's surprisingly simple. So I guess I'm going to call it is called military cultural competence. Um, so I'm just going to start off with a very simple baseline things. So um, one of the stereotypes that folks, veterans, get is they're called a soldier. And for me, that's great. I was in the Army. That's what we were called. But if you get someone from the Navy being called a soldier, ooh, you've already started off on the wrong foot, right? Because they're sailors, and Marines are Marines, and Air Force folks are airmen. Um, and so immediately they're already feeling like that's some sort of microaggression that they have to sort out or ignore, or they're frustrated by. So just understanding just the terminology, that shows that person that you are aware that there's some sort of distinctions um, between military service members and veterans. So that's just a general baseline. And instead of saying thank you for your service, um, a better question, um, if you're not sure, it would be, did you serve? And if you do know that they served, it would be, well, what branch did you serve in? And that recognizes to the veteran that, oh, that there's the Army and the Navy and yada yada. And a good follow-up question would be, oh, what did you do? Because there is there's a little bit of maybe a myth or an idea out there that every military person is an infantryman, because that's what we see on TV. And to some extent, every single service member is trained in these basic military skills, which the infantry skills are sort of the foundation of soldiering. Um, and so, but you deploy to Iraq, Afghanistan, or wherever you maybe go, and there's only a small percentage of those folks that are actually infantrymen or infantry women now, which is, in my opinion, a great thing. Um, and and so you have to understand that there's people that were in Iraq and Afghanistan for a year, and all they did was sit behind a computer and do weather reports, or they you know pumped gas, or did maintenance, or did all of these. Oh, I see a comment here. Can you explain infantry? Yeah, I can absolutely explain infantry. Um, so um, the infantry is essentially the ground forces, and their mission is to close with and engage and destroy the enemy. It's a very simple job description, and you can have a light infantry who either walk around or move around in light vehicles, like Humvees. Um, you have uh, you have mechanized infantry, which can be in more up armored vehicles. And then you can have airborne infantry who jump in. You can have air assault infantry who come in on helicopters. Um, and so, yeah, Bruce, it's the sharp point of the spear. That's exactly right. Um, and so you got to understand that not every person who's in the military was the person that was kicking in the door. You know, there's they all those rules go to support the person who's kicking in the door, but not everyone is that. Um, you know, you think about it like sports. You have the basketball players who are on the court playing the game, but you have an entire organization who is supporting that effort. And um, and to discount those folks um, as not having or as not veterans or not even understanding that the scope um, of service members' job is so big, um, already gets you on a point where um, you're probably heading down the wrong road. Um, Another thing I think that everyone should really know about veterans, especially if you're bringing a veteran into your organization, is the one thing that that veteran is going to be able to provide, regardless of the job, is some leadership. And that's because um, leadership in the military is really built from the ground up. So, um, and not to make this an infantry thing, but I was an infantryman, so that's what I know. So, in an infantry unit, you have a team leader. That team leader is in charge of 3 people, and that team leader is probably, I don't know, 22 years old, charge of 3 human beings. And then you got a 25 to 26-year-old squad leader who's in charge of 9 people. And then you have a platoon leader, which was my job, who I was at 25. I was in charge of 40 people, millions of dollars worth of equipment. And um, the, the doctrinal uh, job of the platoon leader is you are responsible for everything your platoon does and fails to do. That's a lot of it's a lot to put on a 25-year-old. And then you have the next level up. You have a company commander who, at the age of 28, maybe 30, is in charge of 120 people and even more millions of dollars worth of equipment. And then you have a battalion commander who's maybe 35 to 40, and they're in charge of about 720 people. So if you get someone in your organization who's been in the military even for 4 or 5 years, they're going to have a lot of leadership experience. Um, and so, one of the things that is difficult, I think, and I'm going to get into a little bit later, is sometimes it's hard for veterans to quantify that type of leadership experience um, because uh, the civilian world and the job world is so different um, than the military in terms of what the mission is for each specific thing. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Um, another bias thing or another thing that maybe people don't think about, and this one definitely affected me and still does to some extent, is this idea of appearance. I can't tell you how many times that I've been to like before a meeting and said, "What's the uniform for this?" Like it's just a weird thing that is really hard for me to attach. Like trying to show up in the right place at the right time in the right uniform. Um, and so these are just little things that I think veterans carry with them, and uh, and I don't think people necessarily from the outside looking in even notice that that is a concern or that's even going to eat up any space in someone's brain. Um, I mean, I've had days where I'm looking at the mirror and I before I go to work and I'm like, man, I'm gonna get in trouble because I don't have the right haircut. And then I go, I've been out of the army for like 15 years. What am I talking about? And it's just those little things that stick with us. Um, and so, uh, and that's pretty inconsequential. But these are little things that folks, if you know this, you can be a little bit more sensitive to it. Um, a big one uh, is, and it goes along with not everyone was the infantry, but not everyone who has been in the military has killed somebody. Um, and for those um, who may have killed somebody, uh, it's probably not a question that they want to hear right off the bat from someone. It's kind of like, take me out to dinner first. Um, but if that's information that a veteran wants to volunteer, they'll volunteer that information. And and the other thing is it goes back to these introductory questions, right? Like when you're building a rapport with someone, you don't ask them, the big life questions right at the start. You get to know them. And so I think a piece of that is you may be interested in that question, and that's totally fair because that is a part of that person's experience, maybe. Um, but allow that veteran to tell their story to you in at the pace they want to. Because some people might be more open to talking about that. In my experience, at the start, I didn't want to talk about it to anyone because I felt I was going to be judged based on the actions I took that I didn't even think were wrong. Um, and that's a hard place to sit in to be like, well, why do I have to explain to this person why I did all these things when I was in such a complex environment that even I still to this day am trying to understand. So I think being sensitive to those types of things um, is going to do a lot to make that veteran feel like uh, they're actually a part of your organization and not this outsider that is, sitting on the periphery of your company. Um, the other thing, I guess, especially with this big long war, is this idea that all veterans have PTSD, or if a veteran has PTSD, they're gonna snap, and they're gonna lose it on someone. And um, I don't think that's necessarily the case, um, broadly speaking, and it's certainly not the case in my experience. Uh, I suffered from PTSD, and um, it's interesting because you know in trying to figure all of that out, which is a big sandwich to eat. um, I really found that some of the things that stressed me out were not the blood and gut stuff. The blood and gut stuff was the stuff that I kind of anticipated happening. But some of the difficult things are just like feeling constant pressure to not screw up because you know that um, the consequence of screwing up is going to be someone being hurt, killed. Um, and those little things um, don't make people snap. Those things over time get people stressed out. And if you can't let go of those types of things, then that's going to negatively impact your performance. It's going to make you feel miserable. It's going to make you miserable to be around. but it's not going to make you punch your coworker in the face. So I think it's just those are things that um, you certainly should be aware that a veteran may be more susceptible to PTSD because that's just true. The statistics show that veterans suffered PTSD at a greater rate than the rest of the population in the United States. Um, but you got to have a little bit of nuance with the individual um, and understanding their experience to understand how the PTSD may be affecting them, so that you can work with them to accommodate that, right? Like every employer has a duty to accommodate um, a disability. And so with that in mind, if there's something going on, that takes that conversation between the employer and the veteran to understand what's going on. And it's critical. But if the employer can't even understand the basics of PTSD, then it's going to be hard to apply that to that specific veteran. Um, Going along with that, um, one thing that can be difficult for some veterans is asking for help. And that can come in a couple forms. So you got, um, I think the most identifiable one is, they don't want to be seen as weak. Um, the other signs, or another way would be, um, veterans are typically have this idea that they're supposed to sacrifice and the mission is important, and you know I will put the mission ahead of myself. And so maybe they'll take on more than they can. And then the other piece is trust. Um, and I think that one is the hardest to to unpack, because a lot of that's rooted in trauma. Um, it's you have someone who deployed and watched their friends get killed. It's very difficult for them to want to make a new friend that they can trust with some responsibility, because there is just a pain associated with the loss that's really hard to get over sometimes. Um, and so one one thing that uh, an employer can do to assist with that, and something that when I worked at New Miller they did a great job, is we ran cases as at least a two-person team, um, and that was really helpful to me, because I tended to want to do as much as I could. Um, but it's nice to be able to have a backup that you can run ideas off with, that you can say, hey, I need some help. I need you to, I need to offload a couple things on you so that I can keep up to speed. Um, and that communication piece is helpful. But if it's built into your organization, um, that's going to be helpful to the veteran, because that brings some sort of a structure of and team environment that they're going to be used to. Uh, in the military, you do everything together. There's, the buddy rule is you don't go anywhere without a buddy, and I can tell you that I rarely in my military experience ever saw someone walking around by themselves. They're always with somebody else. Um, and so if you have structures in your organization that allow that, um, that veteran's going to thrive in it. And I don't think that team environments are exclusive to the military. I think that's generally a great way to attack any problem. Um, Another thing with veterans uh, that the general population might not understand is this idea of identity. And you get out of the military, and that is a very, especially in the last 20 years, that's an intense experience. Um, and based on the person, you know, they may identify as a veteran as this, true blue super patriot, or they maybe I not want to have that as part of their identity as all at all. So you have to appreciate that people leaving the military, um, they're trying to figure out a little bit who they are. You know, they're a little bit older than most folks entering the workforce, um, but they're also going back to a workforce that they either never were in to begin with, or it's something brand new. Um, and so I think it's just something uh, to be thoughtful of, that, you know, when you have a veteran coming into your organization, they might not really know how they fit in. They may not know what the next steps are, you know, to move up the ladder. Um, and that might be a little bit because they're trying to figure out who the heck they are too. Um, some ways that employers can address that issue. Um, you can ask questions like, how did the military shape you? What factors do you consider in looking for a job? Well, you know, why do you want to work here? How does that tie into your military experience at all? And that might give you a little bit of flavor um, of who they are and who they want to be. Um, Another thing is, I think it's really important to remember that veterans with families also are carrying folks with them who experienced um, uh, their time in the military but didn't sign up for it. Um, and it's important because um, you have to understand that uh, the family is there to support the veteran. Um, and that family also is going to be a great source of maybe how to help the veteran. Um, so don't negate that component, because it really might help you get the best out of the veteran. And then this is a big one, uh, is transition. Along with this whole transition thing is, you know, when folks get out of the military, typically they either come back to their hometown or they go to a new town. And in both of those cases, if you come back to your old hometown, it's not the same. You know, people have gone and moved. Everything is different. You might not have friends here, and so integrating veterans into the community, uh, to me, is critical, um, because you have these folks who um, felt like they were really part of something. At least in my case, I really felt like I was part of a team. I had my friends. We had all these things that we liked to do together. And then I get out and I have no friends. Um, and so I think people tend to uh, recede back, isolate a little bit more. And I think the studies will show you, if you isolate, you stop doing physical activity, start eating more, drinking, doing other things that aren't beneficial to you, it kind of snowballs. Um, and so I think a really important thing to do is when you know you have veterans who are just transitioning out, is making sure that they're getting connected to people in their community, to things that they care about. One thing that I did was I became involved with a nonprofit called Team Red, White, and Blue, um, which essentially their mission is to keep veterans active and get them engaged with their local community. With the idea of, let's say you like to cycle when you're in the military. Now you're in Stockton, you have your bike, but you don't have a buddy to ride with. Well, they're going to try and get riding groups going. They're going to try and plug you into whoever um, the bike community is in that town, so that you can find new friends and find sort of a new purpose, and a new group. And I think that's really crucial, um, is making sure that if you know who that veteran is, like getting to know them to get to know what their interests are. Because you might like, let's say you have a veteran who's super into music. Well, got the Stockton Symphony. Like it's an amazing, as Liz can tell you, it's an amazing organization. And like the veteran might feel tentative. Um, so if you can make them aware of these things and sort of encourage them to go do it, it it'll really pay lots of dividends, I think. Um, yeah, I guess just my overall uh, thing with this military cultural competence is just take a veteran as who they are. You know, there have been so many times that people have come up to me and insinuated that I liked something or believed in something, and it's very awkward to tell that person that like, nah, that's not how it works for me. So just take a veteran as they are, um, and go from there. Okay, I'm going to talk about transferable skills a little bit here. So generally, I would say don't recruit veterans because they're veterans. Um, I can tell you there's a lot of great veterans out there. That doesn't mean everybody who served in the military is going to be a great employee. And that also doesn't mean everyone who served in the military is even that is a good person. I mean, there's people in the military who've done some awful things. Um, so don't just hire someone because they're a veteran. But keep in mind that if someone is a veteran and they're qualified for your job, they're going to have a lot of skills that may be hard to quantify or put on a resume. Um, I mean, just the first thing is if we're talking about diversity, the military is by far the most diverse work environment I've ever been in. I mean, you're working with folks from Alaska, South Dakota. I had I had a I had a blood from San Francisco, and I had a crip from Jamaica, Queens. They were friends. So the environment in the military is so random because you have a slice of people from all over the country. You put them in together, and they say, "Okay, go solve this incredibly impossible problem." And there's no time for BS or like fighting about stuff that doesn't matter. All that matters is the mission and getting there to the end together. And I think just that mindset really makes you focus on who people are and what they can contribute to the group versus, oh, this person's different than me, so I'm just gonna like go the other way. There was a time where when we were deployed that we had a truck flip over, and we tried for about an hour to try and flip this thing over until one of my privates, who had no idea about this, but he ran a tow truck business. He goes, "Hey, I think I can get this out in 5 minutes." And I'm like, "Oh, great. Like, let's do it." 5 minutes later, it was done. So just, you got to understand there's such a diverse population just in the military in general. And the culture of the military is just bring people together and get the mission done. And so they're already going to be used to a diverse environment. Um, let's see. Um, Another thing, I kind of a double-edged sword is, veterans may be used to a high-paced, high-pressure, and competitive environment, and so that uh, may be something that's important to your organization. I would just say keep in mind that with those high-paced environments and this high-stress environments, I think it's important to keep in mind that a high stress environment in the civilian world is different than a high stress environment in combat. But that feeling of stress from the combat experience is going to bleed over into normal stressful environments to some degree. And so I think being aware of that and making sure um, that after a stressful work thing that you're understanding that that veteran might need to decompress a little bit, or maybe you need to intentionally say, hey, like, you need to take a day off because this was really hard. Um, uh, in terms of transferable skills, I think you can have a job in the military. You're a pilot, right? If you're a helicopter pilot and you want to get into aviation, that's clearly a hard skill that will transfer over. Um, but like for myself, um, as an infantry officer, like my job was to kick down doors and kidnap people. I mean, let's call it what it was. Um, and how do you transfer that, right? And so I think there's a lot of soft skills that veterans um, have uh, that maybe they don't realize, or that are difficult to communicate to an employer. Uh, and number one, we talked about leadership, we talked about teamwork. Um, some other things are communication, right? Veterans typically will be very direct in their communication, um, and that can be good and bad. Um, and so, uh, it can be good because they'll get right to the point. It may be bad to the extent that um, it might not uh, come off as sounding very empathetic. Um, and so that's something that certainly as a veteran, I try to be mindful about. Um, but I promise you, a veteran will tell you the truth if there's a problem with something at work. Creativity. We had the example of my soldier um, with the towing thing. Like, there's insane situations that veterans are going to encounter in their military experience that is going to take some sort of creative thinking. Um, and I would say veterans are not afraid to think outside of the box to get something done. Planning. Every single thing that we did uh, in the army was planned out to a T and rehearsed over and over and over again. Um, and so just that knowledge of how to, start a project from nothing and get it to the end, I mean, if you can train someone in how your organization does that, that person already knows the basic building blocks of getting a project from start to finish. Um, and then just adaptability, problem solving. There's a saying in the military that no plan survives the first bullet, and that's true. Really in anything that you can come up with a perfect plan, um, but the real world conditions are never going to be exactly what you anticipated. And veterans typically, uh, um, okay, I'll answer that PTSD question. Um, yeah, so I think with veterans with PTSD, so everyone's going to be different. Um, I, in my experience, was at first my experience. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't really even know that it was affecting me, because I was doing my job and I just thought everything was a little bit harder. Um, and so I think that's, again, you got to take that veteran um, as they are, and knowing that everyone's PTSD is going to be a little bit different. Um, I think you just treat them like how you'd want to treat a friend. If you see someone struggling, or if you see that someone's work product isn't what, excuse me, isn't, up to snuff or whatever the case may be, I think sitting down with them and just having a nice, honest conversation with them is going to go a long way to helping them. Because I think at the end of the day, when someone is struggling with PTSD, the hard part is that they feel like they're letting everybody else down. And there's that shame that goes with it of like, I am struggling, but not only is it hard for me, now I'm affecting other people. And that is really difficult to deal with. So I think that the first thing that a business can do to support a veteran with PTSD is tell them that like, it's okay that you're struggling, and to make it clear to the veteran that they are more important than the job. And I can tell you that I think is Mike Tenner on this today. I came to Mike Tenner last uh, November and told him I was struggling, and his immediate response was, "Okay, like well, what do you need to do?" And to me, that took such a huge burden off of me of something I was holding on and I didn't know how to deal with it. And he just was a human being. He just said, "Okay, like don't even worry about it." Um, and I think that just being kind and honest, and it wasn't like he's saying like, "Well, you know you're not off the hook for doing this work and stuff," but it's let's take the time so that you can stop, you can take care of yourself, and then you can come back and keep it going. Which I think is what everybody wants. And I think if you have a veteran who needs help, telling them that they can take a pause from the mission and go get help and come back, that's huge. Because at least for me, I felt very dedicated to the mission of my work, even though it was, you know, helping folks in civil litigation circumstances. I really felt like I was trying to help these people, and feeling like, yeah, you have to go to the bench and sit down to take care of yourself is a hard pill to swallow. And I think that's a lot of the reason why veterans might not seek help, is because they want to keep helping, um, to the neglect of their own, physical health. So I guess the short answer to the long answer is sit down, be a human being, be honest, and come up with a plan. That's big. You don't want to just recognize that the veteran's struggling and say, okay, let's say, okay, well, what's the plan to get you right, to get you fixed? Not, I take that back. That's a bad way to say it. What's the best way to get you back to work and being productive, um, and feeling better? See what else we got here. We got about 10 minutes. Um, I guess a couple things of engaging with veterans in your organization. Um, I think, well, one thing, you guys are here getting this information, for what it's worth. And I just want to recognize that I, um, I'm just looking at a comment. Sorry. Um, I think just sitting here and learning and sharing your information, sharing this information with folks is important. But also, please don't, this is my perspective. Um, and there may be other veterans like Antonisha's on this. She might have a totally different perspective than me, on certain things, because her experience in the Navy is totally different than my experience in the Army. And so I would say don't take what I'm saying as like a monolith that this is the veteran culture, because that is certainly not the truth. Um, let's see. I'm looking at Susan's question. I think it says, I think being aware that a startle response, i.e., coworkers coming up suddenly from behind the veteran and realizing, uh, startling noise, all these things. Okay. 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 So I guess the startle response one, I think that's really hard. Um, that's a really tricky one. I think that's a no fault situation. Um, I think that's one where if you are aware and maybe get a startled response, you might not get that veteran might not be aware that they're struggling with that. So I would say just information is helpful. If there's going to be a big loud thing coming up, just saying, hey, we're going to be doing this and it's going to get loud. And just that information will maybe help them settle down. The other thing too is um, if that veteran comes to you and says, hey, that upset me and for these reasons, then you know you'll you'll be able to understand that. But I would say give them a spot to do it where they're, take them aside, don't make them do it in front of everyone. It's like simple things that you would do to other folks who are struggling with whatever their thing is too. Um, Large gaps in their employment service due to disability. Um, yeah, I think that's I've never thought about this question until I just read it. So it's off the cuff a little bit. I really think just letting the veteran be honest about why there was a gap is important, um, because that will clue you into the reason. I think that's why the employer wants to know why there's a gap, because it doesn't necessarily mean there is a gap for a negative reason. Um, but I guess it's what you're trying to get to is what's the best way to explain that. And I think it's just being honest, um, but also understanding that when they're explaining it, if it's military related, um, that maybe ask questions to the extent that it's appropriate in the conversation to dig down into what is associated with their military experience. And if the veteran, you know, invites that kind of question by giving out some information, um, that might be their way of opening up. Um, but again, it's all about pacing, right? Don't jump to if you think you know where it's going and why there is a gap in employment, let them get to there by sharing their story. Don't just jump to the answer, because that might be a little bit triggering, because they're thinking, okay, well, why would you just think this? Um, um, Sean asked a very funny question.
I got a
Um, yeah, Susan, great question about the TBI, because I can at least speak from personal experience on that. I suffered from migraines, um, from blast injuries, and um, again, I think uh, it's important for the veteran to share that with your work and explain what's going on, um, just like anybody else would with any other type of disability. And it comes back to the employer and the veteran working together. Um, and if you make just with any human being, if you make them feel welcome and you make them feel like they're in a safe space, they're going to be more willing to share with you why the disability is hard. And I think because of the military experience with the war, um, and try it's really difficult to explain the war to people, because for me, I felt like it was too much to put on to people. If I was going to tell people war stories, I was like, man, like this is messed up stuff that I'm about to tell you. And so I think some of that makes it more difficult for a veteran to be forthcoming about maybe what his TBI or her TBI disability is, or whatever the disability is. But I think if you're sensitive to it and you're kind, it's going to work itself out. I guess the last few things I would say is, if you have a veteran in your organization, like, get to know them. And I would say just generally understand that there's going to be resources for veterans in your community. And if you have an idea of what they are, then you can point them in that direction. I mean, and in addition to, some employers have like affinity groups, maybe larger employers. So you could start a veteran affinity group in your organization. But if you have an understanding of these veteran organizations that are local, so like you have Team RWB, Team Rubicon, which does disaster relief, and Mission Continues, which does they do like civic projects. Those are just three I can think of off the top of my head. If you can know who those are, you can get them connected to that. And then at a bare minimum, you know, you can go to you can point them to the veteran county service officer. Yep, Susan nailed it. And those folks are going to have a ton of resources. I guess maybe the one thing you may want to be aware of is some veterans have a little bit of trepidation of going back and working with the government for various reasons. So maybe they won't want to be open to it. But if you're there and you keep talking to them about it, I think over time you're probably the message will get through, and they'll want to get connected to those people or whatever services they may need. And then the last question was from Sean, and I would say that they're even more better looking and more intelligent. So I'd say I'm on the lower end of the scale. Yeah, so that's all I got.
That's all. That's good. No, thank you so much, Josh, for being here, really, and sharing your story and really helping lead this conversation with us and open it up. It really, really eye opening for me. I know we had some veterans on the call with us today, but a lot non-veterans like myself did. I learned a lot. Just, you don't know what you don't know, and coming from, you're hearing your experiences, and like you said, might not be the same experience for all the other veterans, but I'm sure it's similar, and it's definitely eye opening stuff. You try and be a good person and learn, like you said, but yeah, just stuff I would never thought about, right? So I really appreciate you being here to share.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Sachi. You're going to wrap us up.
Yeah, I just want to say again, thank you so much, Josh, for, sharing your experiences and, just shedding a lot of light on the biases, that veterans face, how we can kind of incorporate them into our workforce. And, I think that was really great. You had a lot of personable experiences that helped, shed light on this. And yeah, I just want to thank you again. And I want to thank everyone, for joining us today. And thank you for showing your support. The webinar will be posted on the Chamber website. I think we had it in the chat earlier. Yes, thank you, Tim. So stocktochamber.org/guide. It'll be up within 2 or 3 days. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you all for coming. Bye. Have a good day.
See your day.